Tonight, our journey takes us to a time and a place that has become a legend, a name synonymous with conquest on a scale the world had never seen. We are going to the vast, windswept steppes of 13th century Mongolia, but we will not be focusing on the great conquests or the terror of the Golden Horde. We will be looking at the machine that made it all possible from the inside. We will explore the gritty, exhausting, and brutally disciplined reality of life for a single warrior in the army of Genghis Khan. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps our small community of quiet history lovers grow more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so feel free to drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see our global community connecting through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Now imagine yourself a young man, perhaps 16 or 17 years old. Your world is not one of cities or farms or stone buildings. Your world is the steppe, a vast, seemingly endless ocean of grass that stretches to the horizon in every direction, under a sky so immense, it feels like a physical presence. This is a world of constant movement, a world governed by the changing seasons and the needs of the herds of horses, sheep, and goats that are the lifeblood of your people. You have spent your entire life on horseback, your legs bowed into a permanent curve that makes walking on the ground feel slightly awkward. You live in a jur, a round, felt tent that can be dismantled and packed onto a cart in a matter of hours. Your life is one of mobility, of hardiness, and of a deep, intimate connection with the natural world. And now you have been called. The great Khan, the ruler who has united the scattered, warring tribes of the steppe into a single terrifying nation, has summoned his warriors. You are to become part of his army, the most formidable military machine of its age. To an outsider, this might seem like a glorious adventure, a chance to win plunder and honor. But for you, the reality is far more daunting. It is a life of unimaginable hardship, of brutal discipline, and of a constant grinding exhaustion that will test the very limits of your physical and mental endurance. Your journey begins not with a formal induction ceremony, but with a simple gathering of your clan. You are part of an Arban, the smallest unit in the Mongol army, a group of 10 men. These are not strangers. They are your brothers, your cousins, your childhood friends. You have grown up with them, hunted with them, wrestled with them. Your loyalty to them is absolute, because the Mongol military system is built upon this principle of collective responsibility. If one man in your Arban shows cowardice in battle, if one man deserts, all 10 of you will be executed. This is not a threat. It is a simple statement of fact, a rule as unchangeable as the rising of the sun. This brutal logic forges your small group into a single, unbreakable unit. Your life depends not just on your own courage, but on the courage of the 9 men standing beside you. Your equipment is not issued to you from a central quartermaster. You are expected to provide your own. Your father gives you the best of the family's horses, not one, but a string of 3 or 4. The Mongol army's greatest advantage is its mobility, and this is made possible by the fact that every warrior has multiple mounts. You will ride one horse until it is tired, and then, without stopping, you will leap from its back onto a fresh horse, allowing the others to run alongside and rest. Your horses are small, shaggy, and incredibly tough, capable of surviving on sparse grazing and enduring the harshest weather. They are your partners, your lifeline. You will spend more time with your horses than with any human being. Your life depends on their health and endurance. Your clothing is designed for a life lived in the saddle, in a climate of extreme heat and extreme cold. You wear loose-fitting trousers and a long, coat-like garment called a deal, made of thick, heavy wool or animal skin, which crosses over your chest and is tied at the waist with a leather belt. This belt is your toolkit. From it, hang your sword, your flint and steel for making fire, a sharpening stone, a coil of rope, and a drinking cup. On your feet, you wear heavy, felt-lined leather boots with thick, inflexible soles. They are excellent for riding, but clumsy and awkward for walking. Your head is covered by a conical helmet of leather or iron, often with a horsehair plume on top. Your primary weapon is the Mongol composite bow. This is not a simple piece of wood. It is a sophisticated, highly engineered weapon, made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, all laminated together with a powerful glue made from fish bladders. It is incredibly powerful, capable of shooting an arrow with enough force to pierce armor at a great distance. It is also a recurve bow, meaning its limbs curve away from the archer. This design allows it to store immense energy in a relatively small size, making it perfect for use on horseback. You have been training with this bow since you were a small child. The ability to shoot with accuracy from a galloping horse is not a specialized skill. It is a basic requirement of every Mongol man. You carry a large quiver containing many different types of arrows, some with broad, leaf-shaped heads for use against unarmored targets, some with long, thin, armor-piercing points, and some with whistles carved into the shaft, which create a terrifying, shrieking sound as they fly through the air. A form of psychological warfare designed to break the enemy's nerve. Your secondary weapon is a short, slightly curved saber for use in close combat. You might also carry a battle axe or a mace hanging from your saddle. And some warriors, the heavy cavalry, will wear a form of lamellar armor, made from small, overlapping plates of hardened leather or iron, stitched together with leather thongs. This provides good protection, but it is heavy and reserved for the elite units. For you, a common warrior, your primary defense is your speed, your skill, and your horse. The army gathers, a vast sea of horsemen on the open steppe. The sight is awe-inspiring. Tens of thousands of warriors, organized into their units of 10, Arban, 100, Zun, 1,000, Mingan, and 10,000, Tumen. The discipline is absolute, the organization meticulous. The army moves not as a chaotic horde, but as a single living organism, its movements directed by a complex system of signals using flags, horns, and smoke. There is no loud shouting of orders, just a quiet, disciplined efficiency that is more intimidating than any battle cry. The campaign begins, and with it, the daily reality of your new life sets in. The first and most constant fact of this life is movement. The Mongol army is always moving. You spend 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day in the saddle. The distances you cover are immense. The army can travel 50 or 60 miles in a single day, a speed that is unheard of for any other army of the time. This relentless pace is a weapon in itself. It allows you to appear where you are least expected, to outmaneuver and encircle your enemies before they even know you are there. But the cost of this mobility is a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. You learn to sleep in the saddle, your body rocking with the rhythm of your horse. You learn to eat in the saddle. Your rations are designed for this life on the move. Your primary food source is the herd of livestock that moves with the army. But you do not often eat fresh meat. The meat is cut into thin strips and dried, creating a hard, jerky-like substance called borts. It is tough and requires a lot of chewing, but it is lightweight, nutritious, and it will not spoil. You carry a bag of this at all times. You might also have a bag of dried milk curd, or arul, another staple of the Mongol diet. And then there is the drink that fuels the army, airag, or fermented mare's milk. This is a sour, slightly alcoholic, yogurt-like beverage that is a cornerstone of the steppe diet. It is nutritious and provides hydration, but to an unaccustomed palate, its taste would be strange and unpleasant. You drink it from a leather pouch that hangs from your saddle. Sometimes, when rations are short and you are moving too fast to hunt, you will resort to a more desperate measure. You will make a small incision in the vein of one of your horses and drink a small amount of its blood, mixed with milk. This gives you vital nourishment without having to kill the precious animal. This is a survival skill born of a harsh and unforgiving environment. Life in the camp at night is simple and Spartan. You do not sleep in large, comfortable tents. You sleep on the ground, under the stars, wrapped in your heavy wool deal. You use your saddle as a pillow. Your small group of 10 men will huddle together for warmth around a small fire made from dried animal dung, as wood is a rare and precious commodity on the open steppe. The nights are filled with the sounds of the camp, the soft nickering of thousands of horses, the low murmur of conversation, the lonely song of a warrior playing a horsehead fiddle. The morin khor, its mournful sound a perfect expression of the vast, empty landscape around you. The discipline is as relentless in the camp as it is on the march. There are strict rules governing every aspect of life. Stealing from a comrade is punishable by death. Falling asleep on watch is punishable by death. Failing to maintain your equipment is a grave offense. Your life, and the lives of your brothers, depend on your bow being properly strung, your arrows being straight, and your horse being well cared for. There is no room for carelessness or laziness. The Mongol army is a professional organization, and it demands absolute professionalism from every one of its members. When you are not on the march, you are training, constantly. You practice your archery, you wrestle, you take part in great organized hunts called nurj. These are not just for gathering food, they are large-scale military exercises. A vast circle, sometimes miles in diameter, is formed by the soldiers. They then slowly begin to advance towards the center, driving all the wild animals, deer, wolves, boars before them. The circle shrinks over a period of days, until the terrified animals are packed together in a small area. Then, the Khan himself signals the beginning of the hunt. It is a chaotic, exhilarating, and dangerous affair. A perfect training for the coordination, discipline, and horsemanship required in a real battle. And then comes the battle itself. The Mongol way of war is not about heroic individual charges. It is a calculated, scientific application of violence, a game of psychological warfare, feigned retreats, and devastating encirclements. You, as a horse archer, are the key to this system. You do not close with the enemy at first. You ride in swift, swirling formations, just out of the range of their own archers and spearmen. You are a cloud of stinging horseflies, a storm of arrows that descends upon the enemy from all directions. You fire, you retreat, you reload, you fire again. You aim for their horses, for the gaps in their armor, for their commanders. Your goal is not to annihilate them in a single charge, but to harass them, to confuse them, to demoralize them, to break their formation. One of the most famous and effective Mongol tactics is the feigned retreat. A portion of your army will engage the enemy, and then, after a brief fight, will turn and pretend to flee in disarray. A less disciplined enemy, sensing victory, will often break their own formation and give chase. This is the moment you have been waiting for. You are luring them into a trap. Once the pursuing enemy is strung out, disorganized, and far from the safety of their own lines, fresh Mongol units, hidden in reserve, will appear on their flanks and rear. The feigned retreat turns into a devastating ambush. The hunters have become the hunted. It is a tactic that requires immense discipline from the men performing the retreat. It is one thing to pretend to flee. It is another to do so in a controlled manner, resisting the very real panic of turning your back on the enemy. When the enemy formation is finally broken, when they are confused and demoralized, then comes the final decisive blow. The heavy cavalry, the armored lancers will charge, their lances couched, their purpose to shatter what remains of the enemy's line. And then you, the light horse archers, will follow, your sabers drawn, to engage in the grim final work of the pursuit. The Mongol army is merciless in its pursuit of a beaten foe. They will chase a fleeing army for miles, for days, ensuring that it can never regroup, that it is utterly and completely destroyed. The aftermath of a battle is a scene of organized, efficient work. You do not celebrate. You immediately begin the task of collecting the enemy's weapons, armor, and horses. You round up the captives. The Mongol policy towards captured populations is a matter of cold, brutal pragmatism. Artisans, engineers, scribes, and anyone with a useful skill are separated and sent back to the Mongol heartland, where their knowledge can be put to use for the empire. Young, able-bodied men might be forcibly conscripted into the Mongol army, often being placed in the front ranks of the next battle, a human shield to absorb the enemy's first volley of arrows. Those who offer no useful skill, and particularly those from a city that offered resistance, are often put to the sword. This policy of calculated terror is a weapon in itself. It sends a clear message to other cities in your path. Resist, and you will be annihilated. Surrender, and your lives may be spared. For you, the young warrior, this life is a constant, relentless assault on your senses and your spirit. You are perpetually tired, perpetually hungry, perpetually living on the edge of a knife. You are far from home, in strange lands with strange climates and strange people. You see things that will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life. The terror in the eyes of a defeated enemy, the desolation of a city put to the torch. You become hardened, your youthful features aging prematurely, your eyes taking on the distant, watchful look of a man who has seen too much. You are a part of the most successful military machine in history. You are a conqueror of the world. But the price of this conquest is your own youth, your own peace of mind. You are a small, anonymous cog in a vast, impersonal machine of war. Your life is governed by a brutal, simple logic. You will ride, you will fight, and you will obey. And if you are lucky, if you are strong, and if your loyalty to your 9 brothers never wavers, you might just survive to see the endless green grass of your homeland again. But you will not be the same boy who left it. You will be a man forged in the crucible of the Khan's army, a man who has seen the world and helped to break it, a silent, weary victor in a war that has consumed your entire world. Let us now retreat from the vast, disciplined machine of the Mongol army and seek out its creator. To understand the force that conquered the world, we must first understand the man who forged it, not in the halls of power or in a formal military academy, but in the harsh, unforgiving crucible of the 12th century Mongolian steppe. Before he was Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, he was a boy named Temujin, and his early life was not one of privilege or destiny, but a brutal, desperate struggle for survival that would shape him into one of the most formidable leaders in human history. Imagine the world into which Temujin was born, around the year 1162. The Mongolian steppe was not a unified nation. It was a chaotic, fractured landscape of nomadic tribes and clans, locked in a state of constant low-level warfare. The Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, the Karaites, these were the names that mattered. They were all part of a shared culture, but they were rivals, competing for the best grazing lands, for horses, for resources, and most importantly, for honor. It was a world governed by a complex code of alliances, blood feuds, and betrayals. A man's loyalty was to his clan and his immediate family. It was a world where a small shift in allegiance could mean the difference between life and death. Temujin was born into this world with a seemingly auspicious start. His father, Yesugei, was a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, a respected, if not overwhelmingly powerful leader. The secret history of the Mongols, our most important, though often mythologized source for this period, tells us that Temujin was born clutching a clot of blood in his right fist, a detail that was later interpreted as a powerful omen, a sign that he was destined to be a great warrior and ruler. But his privileged childhood was to be brutally short-lived. When Temujin was just 9 years old, his father was taking him to the encampment of the Olkhanud tribe to find him a future wife, a common practice for forging alliances. On the journey, they encountered a group of Tatars who were sworn enemies of Yesugei's clan. The Tatars, recognizing their old foe, offered him a meal, a gesture of hospitality that was in reality a death sentence. The food was poisoned. Yesugei, feeling the poison take hold, managed to get his son back to their own camp before he died. His final words to his young son were a warning, a lesson in the treacherous nature of steppe politics. The death of a chieftain was a moment of immense vulnerability for his clan. Yesugei's followers, seeing that his heir was just a boy and that his widow, Hoelun, had no powerful male relatives to protect her, made a cold, pragmatic decision. They abandoned the family. One morning, Hoelun and her children, Temujin, his brothers, and a younger sister, woke up to find the entire encampment gone. They had been left behind to fend for themselves on the open, unforgiving steppe. This was a virtual death sentence. A family without a clan, without the protection of a larger group, had almost no chance of survival. They were now outcasts, the lowest of the low. The years that followed were a brutal education in poverty and desperation. Hoelun, a woman of incredible strength and resilience, kept her family alive. She taught her sons how to survive. They learned to fish in the rivers, to hunt for marmots and other small animals, to dig for edible roots. They lived a hand-to-mouth existence, constantly on the move, constantly hungry, constantly in fear of predators, both animal and human. This period of hardship forged a deep, unbreakable bond between Temujin and his immediate family, but it also created intense internal rivalries. The struggle for scarce resources was a constant source of tension. In one famous and brutal incident, Temujin and his brother Kasar killed their older half-brother Begta. The reason for the killing, according to the secret history, was a dispute over a fish and a lark that Begta had caught and refused to share. This act, while shocking, is a stark illustration of the harsh realities of their world. In a life lived on the absolute edge of survival, a single meal could be a matter of life and death, and the normal bonds of kinship could be tragically broken. But the greatest danger came not from within, but from without. As outcasts, Temujin's family was fair game for any rival clan looking to settle an old score or simply to steal their meager possessions. The Taichi-ud, the very clan that had abandoned them, saw the young Temujin as a potential future threat, a boy who might one day grow up to seek revenge. They sent a raiding party to capture him. Temujin was taken prisoner, his hands and neck locked into a heavy wooden collar called a kangwe, a device of public humiliation. He was now a slave, forced to perform menial tasks for the very people who had betrayed his family. But even as a boy, Temujin possessed an extraordinary resilience and a cunning intelligence. One night, during a feast when his guards were drunk and distracted, he saw his chance. He struck his guard with the heavy wooden kangyu and fled into the darkness. He hid in the nearby river, submerging himself with only his face above the water, the heavy collar still around his neck. A sympathetic man from another clan, who was searching for him, found him hiding there. Instead of turning him in, the man, recognizing perhaps a spark of greatness in the boy, helped him. He took Temujin to his own yurt, removed the kangwe, and hid him under a pile of wool until the search party had passed. This act of kindness from a stranger, in a world defined by betrayal, was a powerful lesson that Temujin would never forget. He learned that alliances could be found in the most unexpected places, and that loyalty was a quality to be treasured above all others. After his escape, Temujin managed to rejoin his family. He was a young man now, no longer a boy. He had survived poverty, starvation, and enslavement. He had learned to be patient, to be observant, to be utterly ruthless when necessary, and to recognize the value of a true ally. He knew that he could not survive alone, that to reclaim his father's position and to protect his family, he needed to forge his own alliances. He needed a powerful patron. His first and most important step was to claim the wife who had been chosen for him all those years ago by his father. He traveled to the encampment of the Olkanud tribe and presented himself to the father of the girl, Berta. He had nothing to offer, no bride price of horses or goods. All he had was his name and his lineage. But Berta's father, a man of honor, respected the promise he had made to Yasuge years before. The marriage was agreed upon. This alliance with Berta's powerful tribe was the first crucial rung on Temujin's long ladder back to power. Berta herself would become his most trusted advisor and the mother of his 4 sons, the heirs to the empire he would one day build. With his new wife and his new alliance, Temujin sought out the most powerful patron he could find, a man named Togrul, the Khan of the Karaite tribe. Togrul had been an Anda, or sworn blood brother, to Temujin's father, Yasuge. Temujin approached him, reminded him of this old bond, and offered him his loyalty in exchange for protection. Togrul, perhaps seeing a reflection of his old friend in the determined young man, or perhaps simply seeing a useful new vassal, agreed. Temujin was no longer an outcast. He was now under the protection of one of the most powerful chieftains on the steppe. His rising fortunes, however, attracted the attention of old enemies. The Merkit tribe, who had a long-standing feud with Temujin's family, launched a surprise raid on his small encampment. Temujin managed to escape, but the Merkits captured his wife, Berta. This was more than a personal tragedy. It was a profound public humiliation, a direct challenge to his honor as a man and a leader. He knew he had to get her back. He went to his patron, Togrul, and to another young chieftain with whom he had recently sworn his own oath of blood brotherhood, a man named Jamuka. Together, they raised a large force of warriors and launched a counterattack on the Merkits. The campaign was a success. The Merkits were defeated and Berta was rescued. This victory was a turning point. It was Temujin's first major military success. It earned him a reputation as a capable and determined leader, a man who would go to any length to avenge a wrong and protect his own. For a time, Temujin and his blood brother Jamuka joined forces, their combined camp becoming a powerful new force on the steppe. But their friendship, forged in shared struggle, was not destined to last. They were 2 very different kinds of leaders. Jamuka was an aristocrat, a man who believed in the traditional order of the steppe, where leadership was the birthright of the noble clans. Temujin, on the other hand, was a pragmatist. His experiences as an outcast had taught him to value ability over bloodline. He began to attract a following of men from all different clans, including many commoners and former outcasts like himself. He promoted men based on their loyalty and their skill, not on their lineage. This was a radical, revolutionary idea in the rigidly hierarchical world of the steppe, and it was a direct threat to Jamuka's traditional authority. The rivalry between the 2 friends grew, fueled by the whispers of their followers. The final break came over a seemingly minor incident. Jamuka made a cryptic comment to Temujin, suggesting that they should camp separately, with Jamuka taking the more advantageous position. Temujin, understanding the subtext, that Jamuka was asserting his seniority, chose to separate his followers and go his own way. The 2 blood brothers were now rivals, and on the unforgiving steppe, rivalry inevitably led to war. The years that followed were a long, complex, and brutal struggle for supremacy. Temujin and Jamuka fought a series of battles, their fortunes ebbing and flowing. Temujin suffered defeats. At one point, his forces were routed, and he was forced to flee once again into the wilderness. But he never gave up. With each setback, he learned, he adapted, he rebuilt. He continued to build his army based on merit and loyalty, creating a force that was more disciplined, more cohesive, and more devoted to him personally than any other on the steppe. He systematically began to unify the tribes, not through conquest alone, but through a shrewd combination of diplomacy, political marriage, and ruthless, calculated warfare. He absorbed defeated clans into his own, breaking up their old tribal structures and reorganizing them into new military units loyal only to him. He was not just conquering his rivals, he was dismantling the old chaotic world of intertribal warfare and building something new in its place, a single, unified Mongol nation. His old patron, Togrul of the Karats, eventually came to see him as a threat and turned against him. Temujin, with his smaller but more disciplined force, defeated him in a decisive battle. His final great rival was Jamuka himself. The two men who had once been like brothers faced each other one last time. Jamuka's coalition of traditionalist tribes was defeated. Jamuka was captured by his own men and handed over to Temujin. The final meeting between the two men is one of the most poignant moments in the secret history. Temujin, honoring their old bond, offered to forgive Jamuka to become blood brothers once again. But Jamuka refused. He acknowledged that there could only be one sun in the sky. He knew that his time was over. He asked only for a noble death, one without the shedding of blood, as was the custom for royalty. Temujin granted his request. Jamuka's back was broken, a swift and honorable end for the man who had been his greatest friend and his most bitter enemy. By the year 1206, the process of unification was complete. All the tribes of the Mongolian steppe were now under the rule of a single leader. Temujin called a great assembly, a Kurultai, on the banks of the Yonon River, and there, the chieftains of all the tribes proclaimed him the Great Khan, the ruler of all the people who lived in the felt tents. They gave him a new name, a title of ultimate authority, Genghis Khan, the boy who had been born clutching a blood clot, who had been abandoned, starved, and enslaved, was now the master of a unified nation and the commander of the most powerful army on earth. His rise was a testament to his own incredible will, his strategic genius, and his profound understanding of the harsh social ecology of his world. He had learned its brutal lessons, the importance of loyalty, the folly of trust in old traditions, the necessity of absolute ruthlessness, and he had used those lessons to break the old world and forge a new one in his own image. The first, most difficult and most important of his conquests was complete. He had conquered his own people. Now, he would turn his gaze outward, to the great, settled civilizations that lay beyond the endless grass sea, and the world would tremble. Let us now move forward in time, past the great conquests, past the establishment of the largest contiguous land empire in human history, to the final days of the man who made it all possible. In the year 1227, during a campaign against the Tangut kingdom in what is now northwestern China, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, died. He was in his 60s, and the exact cause of his death remains uncertain. It may have been from injuries sustained after falling from his horse, from a sudden illness like typhus, or from complications of old age. But the manner of his death is far less mysterious than the question of what happened next. For Genghis Khan, a man whose life was a story of conquest played out on the grandest possible stage, orchestrated a final act that was a masterpiece of absolute secrecy. He vanished from the world, leaving behind no grand tomb, no pyramid, no mausoleum. He was buried in a place so secret that, to this day, its location remains one of the most enduring and captivating mysteries in all of history. The desire for a secret burial was not an act of spontaneous humility. It was a deeply ingrained tradition of the Mongol people and a calculated final command from the Khan himself. For the Mongols, the final resting place of a great leader was a sacred, powerful space. It was not a place for tourists or pilgrims. It was a place that needed to be protected, to be kept inviolate for all eternity, so that the spirit of the leader could rest undisturbed and continue to watch over his people. To disturb the grave of an ancestor was one of the most profound desecrations imaginable. Genghis Khan, a man who understood the power of symbolism better than almost anyone, was determined that his own grave would never be found, never be defiled by his enemies or disturbed by the curious. The operation to ensure this secrecy was as ruthless and brutally efficient as one of his military campaigns. The secret history of the Mongols, and later accounts, like those of Marco Polo, provide us with a narrative that is a mixture of historical fact and legendary embellishment, but which paints a vivid picture of the immense effort involved. After his death in the field, a great funeral procession was formed to carry the Khan's body back to his homeland in Mongolia, a journey of many hundreds of miles. This was not a public procession of mourning. It was a silent, grim, and deadly affair. Imagine the scene. A small, elite guard of the Khan's most trusted warriors escorting a simple, unadorned cart carrying the body of their leader. Their orders were absolute. Anyone and anything that witnessed the passing of the funeral cortege was to be killed. A farmer working in his field who looked up at the wrong moment. A merchant on a lonely road. A herdsman with his flock. All were cut down without hesitation. The purpose of this trail of death was twofold. First, it was to prevent the news of the Khan's death from spreading prematurely. The empire was vast and still consolidating its power. News of the founder's demise could spark rebellions or succession crises. Secrecy was a matter of state security. Second, and more importantly, it was to erase the path of the procession from human memory, to ensure that no one could ever retrace the route back to the final burial site. The journey was long and slow. The procession finally reached a specific, preordained area in the Khenti Mountains of northeastern Mongolia, a region near the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun. This was the area where Genghis Khan had been born, the landscape of his difficult youth. It was here, in the land that had shaped him, that he wished to be laid to rest. According to legend, as a young man, he had once rested under a solitary tree on the mountainside and had been struck by the beauty and tranquility of the spot, declaring that it would be his final resting place. Once the location was chosen, the next phase of the operation began. A large pit was dug. The Khan was buried, likely in the simple manner of a Mongol warrior, along with treasures and perhaps even horses to serve him in the afterlife. The details of the burial itself are unknown, but what happened next is the most extraordinary part of the legend. The slaves and craftsmen who had prepared the grave were all systematically executed by the soldiers of the honor guard. This was a brutal but necessary act to ensure that the exact location of the tomb would not be revealed by those who had dug it. But the secrecy did not end there. The soldiers who had carried out these executions were, in turn, executed themselves by another, even more elite group of guards. This created a chain of death, a cascading series of silences, ensuring that the secret was held by an ever smaller, ever more loyal circle of individuals. The final step was to obliterate any physical sign of the burial. According to one popular legend, 1,000 horses were driven over the filled-in grave, their hooves trampling the ground until it was indistinguishable from the surrounding steppe. Another story claims that a river was diverted to flow over the site, hiding it forever beneath the water. And yet another says that trees were planted over the grave, and that they grew into a dense, impenetrable forest. Whether these dramatic details are literally true or are later embellishments, the underlying purpose is clear: to erase the location of Genghis Khan's tomb from the face of the earth. The final guardians of the secret, a tribe known as the Darkhad, were given a sacred duty. They, and their descendants, were tasked with guarding the entire region, an area of hundreds of square miles known as the Ik Korig, or the Great Taboo. For centuries, this area was completely closed off. To enter it was forbidden on pain of death. The Darkhad people were exempt from taxes and military service. Their only duty was to patrol the sacred territory, to keep out all intruders, and to preserve the undisturbed peace of the Khan's final rest. This combination of a secret burial, the elimination of all witnesses, the deliberate obscuring of the site, and the centuries-long guarding of the entire region proved to be incredibly effective. The location of Genghis Khan's tomb was lost. It became a thing of legend, a whispered secret, a national taboo, and so it remained for nearly 800 years. In the 20th century, with the advent of modern archaeology and a changing political landscape in Mongolia, the search for the lost tomb began. It has become one of the great holy grails of archaeology, a quest that has attracted historians, scientists, and adventurers from around the world. But the search is fraught with immense challenges, both practical and cultural. The first challenge is the sheer scale of the search area. The Khenti Mountains are a vast, rugged, and remote wilderness. The area designated as the Ich Korig is immense, and the potential burial sites within it are countless. Modern archaeological tools, such as ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and magnetometry, can help to identify potential man-made structures beneath the surface. But the process is slow, expensive, and painstaking. The second challenge is the cultural sensitivity of the project. For many Mongolians, the desire to find the tomb is seen as a foreign obsession, a violation of the deep cultural respect for the sanctity of the grave. Genghis Khan is not just a historical figure in Mongolia, he is the founding father of the nation, a figure of immense, almost divine national pride. The idea of disturbing his final resting place, of digging up his remains for scientific study, is seen by many as a profound act of desecration. The government of Mongolia has, at times, been ambivalent or even hostile to foreign archaeological expeditions, caught between the potential for a world historic discovery and the desire to respect the traditions and sentiments of its own people. The spirit of the Dark-Haired Guardians, in a way, still watches over the land. Despite these challenges, a number of expeditions have been mounted over the years. They have used a combination of historical research, analysis of the landscape, and high-tech instrumentation. One of the most significant clues comes from the secret history, which states that the Khan was buried near the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun. This mountain has been identified, and much of the search has been concentrated in the valleys and foothills that surround it. Archaeologists look for subtle signs, for anomalies in the landscape that might indicate a hidden, man-made structure. They look for unusual patterns in the vegetation, for slight depressions or elevations in the ground, for magnetic signatures that might suggest buried metal. Satellite imagery has been used to identify ancient riverbeds, lending credence to the legend of a river being diverted to cover the tomb. Ground-penetrating radar can create images of what lies beneath the surface, revealing potential walls, chambers, or burial pits. Several promising sites have been identified over the years. In one expedition, a team discovered a large man-made platform on a hillside, a structure that was clearly not natural, but its purpose remains unknown. In another, researchers using non-invasive methods identified a complex of what appear to be corner-like shapes buried deep underground, consistent with the layout of a large tomb complex. But no one has yet put a spade in the ground at these most sensitive locations. No one has yet found the definitive proof. The mystery is deepened by the fact that we are not just looking for one tomb, but for a whole complex. The Mongol emperors who came after Genghis Khan, his sons and grandsons like Ogadai and Kublai Khan, were also buried in the same secret sacred area. The Ich Korig is likely home to an entire imperial necropolis, a valley of the Khans, hidden from the world. The potential archaeological prize is almost beyond imagining. The tombs would almost certainly contain a vast wealth of artifacts, weapons, armor, jewelry, silk robes, gold and silver objects that would give us an unprecedented insight into the material culture of the Mongol elite. And of course, there is the potential of finding the remains of the Khans themselves, which could provide invaluable information about their health, their diet, and their genetic lineage. But the mystery endures. The tomb remains hidden, and perhaps this is how it should be. The secrecy of the burial was Genghis Khan's final and perhaps most successful command. He was a man who controlled a vast empire, who redrew the map of the world. But in his death, he achieved a different kind of power. The power of absence, the power of mystery. He created a void in the historical landscape that has been filled with legend, with speculation, and with a profound sense of awe. To contemplate the mystery of his burial is to contemplate the nature of power and legacy. Most great rulers in history have sought to preserve their memory through grand, monumental tombs. The pyramids of the pharaohs, the mausoleum of Augustus, the terracotta army of the first Qin emperor. These are statements of power, designed to impress upon future generations the greatness of the ruler. Genghis Khan chose the opposite path. He chose to have his legacy live on, not in a monument of stone, but in the nation he created, in the laws he established, and in the enduring, whispered legend of his final secret resting place. The search for the tomb will undoubtedly continue, as the human desire to solve a great mystery is a powerful one. And perhaps one day, with a new technology or a lucky discovery, the secret will be revealed. But until then, the hills of the Khenti Mountains will keep their silence. The wind will blow over the endless grass, and somewhere beneath that vast, empty landscape, the great Khan will continue his undisturbed rest. His final victory, a perfect, unbroken silence that has lasted for 800 years. Let us now step away from the grand sweep of armies and the silent mystery of tombs and enter the most intimate and influential space in the Mongol Empire, the Gur, or as it is more commonly known in the West, the yurt. To an outsider, it might seem like a simple portable tent, but for the Mongols, and particularly for the great Khan himself, the Jur was the center of the universe. It was a home, a court, a command center, and a political stage, all within a single circular room. To understand the power that Genghis Khan wielded, we must understand the complex human ecosystem that thrived within the felt walls of his mobile court. Imagine the great Khan's camp, the Ordu. It is not a haphazard collection of tents. It is a vast, meticulously organized city on the move. At its very heart, facing south, stands the Khan's own Gur. It is larger and more ornate than the others. Its felt walls perhaps white, a color of sacred significance. Its wooden framework decorated with intricate carvings. This is the seat of power, and access to it is strictly controlled. But the power within this space is not wielded by the Khan alone. It is a shared, complex, and often contentious space, inhabited by the people who had his ear, his trust, and his affection, his wives, his mother, his advisors, and his shamans. The most powerful figures in the Khan's domestic world were, without question, the women. Mongol society, while patriarchal in its leadership structure, afforded women a degree of authority and influence that was remarkable for its time. This was born of pragmatic necessity. In a nomadic society where the men were often away for long periods on hunts or military campaigns, it was the women who were responsible for managing the camp, for raising the children, for controlling the household economy, and for making the crucial day-to-day decisions. A senior wife was not a chattel. She was a partner, a manager, and a powerful political player in her own right. Genghis Khan had several wives and many concubines, a common practice for a powerful chieftain, designed to forge alliances with other clans and to ensure a multitude of heirs. Each of his senior wives had her own jur, her own household, her own herds, and her own sphere of influence. But one stood above all others, his first and primary wife, Berta. Berta was not just the Khan's wife, she was his partner in his rise to power. She was the woman he had fought a war to rescue from the Merkits, the mother of his 4 acknowledged sons, Yochi, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Tolui, who would inherit his empire. Her position was unassailable. She was the empress, the Khatun. Her counsel was deeply valued by the Khan. He trusted her judgment implicitly, not just in domestic matters, but in matters of state. She was a stabilizing force, a woman of great wisdom and dignity, who often acted as a mediator in the fierce rivalries that existed between her ambitious sons. The secret history portrays her as a figure of immense moral authority, the emotional anchor of the Khan's life. To have the support of Berta was to have the support of the Khan himself. The Khan's mother, Holan, was another figure of immense influence, particularly in the early years. She was the woman who had held the family together through the years of starvation and persecution. Her sons, including Genghis Khan, owed their very lives to her strength and resilience. She was the matriarch of the clan, a figure of profound respect. She played a crucial role in raising not only her own children, but also many orphans from defeated tribes, adopting them into the Khan's household. This was a shrewd political move, a way of turning the children of former enemies into loyal followers, but it also speaks to a culture that valued the creation of kinship bonds, even in the midst of brutal warfare. Hoyland's tent was a center of power and patronage in its own right, a place where supplicants would come to seek her favor and her intercession with her powerful son. Life inside the Khan's gur was governed by a strict and complex etiquette. The space was divided into a male side, the west, and a female side, the east, with the place of honor at the very back, opposite the door where the Khan would sit. The hearth in the center of the ger was a sacred space, and it was a grave offense to touch the threshold of the door or to point a knife towards the fire. Visitors would be seated according to their rank, their proximity to the Khan a clear and visible indicator of their status. The Khan's court was not a sedentary bureaucratic affair. It was a mobile, constantly shifting entity, but it was also a place of surprising cosmopolitanism. As the Mongol Empire expanded, it absorbed people from all over the world. Genghis Khan, a supreme pragmatist, believed in using the skills of conquered peoples for the benefit of his empire. His court was filled with a diverse array of advisors and administrators. He had Chinese engineers who taught his army how to build sophisticated siege engines, catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams that were essential for conquering the walled cities of China and Persia. He had Uyghur scribes who adapted their script to create a written language for the Mongols, allowing for the creation of a formal legal code and a system of administration. He He had Muslim merchants who advised him on matters of trade and helped to manage the vast wealth that was now flowing into the empire from the Silk Road. The Khan was famously tolerant of different religions. As long as the leaders of a conquered people prayed for his health and success, he did not care which god they prayed to. His court was a place where Buddhist monks, Nestorian Christians, Muslims, and Taoist sages could all be found. He would often hold debates between them, listening with a curious and open mind to their different philosophies. He was not a man of letters himself, but he had a deep respect for knowledge and a keen understanding of the importance of good governance. He was looking for practical solutions, for ideas and technologies that could help him rule his vast, diverse empire. One of the most important figures in this inner circle of advisors was a man named Yelu Chukai. He was a Khitan prince, a man of immense learning, a Confucian scholar who had served the previous dynasty in northern China. When Genghis Khan conquered his homeland, Yelu Chukai was brought before him. The Khan, impressed by his great height and his long flowing beard, asked him why he had not tried to avenge his former masters. Yelu Chukai famously replied that his family had served that dynasty and he could not be a hypocrite and an enemy to them. But he also stated that he had long been an enemy of their misrule. This honest and courageous answer impressed Genghis Khan, who immediately took him into his service. Yelu Chukai became one of the Khan's most trusted and influential advisors. He was, in essence, the chief civil administrator of the new empire. He introduced a system of taxation that was far more rational and less destructive than the simple plunder that had characterized the early Mongol conquests. He argued against the wholesale slaughter of the inhabitants of conquered cities, convincing the Khan that it was more profitable to tax a living farmer than to kill him. He was a voice of moderation, a force for order and administration in a world that had been turned upside down by war. He was the man who helped to transform the Mongol conquest from a purely destructive force into a functioning, if often brutal, imperial system. His presence at the heart of the Khan's court is a testament to Genghis Khan's remarkable ability to recognize and utilize talent, regardless of its origin. The spiritual life of the court was governed by the powerful figure of the shaman, or Beki. The traditional Mongol religion was a form of shamanism known as Tengrism. It was a belief system centered on the worship of the eternal blue sky, Tengri, the supreme deity, and the Earth Mother, Itugen. The shaman was the intermediary between the human world and the world of the spirits. He could interpret omens, predict the future, heal the sick, and communicate with the ancestors. The chief shaman at Genghis Khan's court, a man named Kokuchu, also known as Teb Tengri, was an incredibly powerful figure. He had been instrumental in proclaiming Temujin as Genghis Khan at the Great Kurultai, his spiritual endorsement lending a vital divine legitimacy to the Khan's rule. For a time, his influence was so great that it rivaled that of the Khan's own family. He became arrogant, using his spiritual authority to challenge the Khan's brothers and to build his own power base. Eventually, the tension between the shaman's spiritual power and the Khan's temporal power became too great. In a final dramatic confrontation, arranged by the Khan himself, Kokuchu was challenged to a wrestling match by Temujin's brother Kasar. He was led outside the Khan's yurt, and in the ensuing match, his back was broken. Genghis Khan had demonstrated, in a typically ruthless fashion, that there was only one ultimate authority in the Mongol world. The shamans would continue to play an important role, but they would always be subordinate to the will of the great Khan. Life within the Ordu was not all politics and administration. It was also a place of feasting and celebration. After a successful campaign, the Khan would host great feasts that could last for days. Huge quantities of mutton and horse meat would be roasted over open fires, and the drinking would be prodigious. The Mongol elite were famously heavy drinkers, their beverage of choice the fermented mare's milk, airag, but also powerful wines and spirits acquired from the sedentary civilizations they had conquered. These feasts were not just parties, they were political events, a way for the Khan to display his generosity, to reward his loyal followers, and to reinforce the bonds of the community. The Khan's personal life within the GR was one of relative simplicity, despite his immense power. He slept on a simple mat on the floor, surrounded by his family. He ate the same food as his soldiers. He wore clothes that were practical and unadorned. He was not a man who surrounded himself with the soft luxuries of the emperors he had conquered. His power was not based on opulence, but on his personal charisma, his military genius, and the unwavering loyalty he inspired in his followers. The yurt of Genghis Khan, therefore, was a microcosm of his empire. It was a place of stark contrasts. It was a family home and a center of global power. It was a place of brutal political calculation and deep personal loyalty. It was a place where a shaman could whisper prophecies in the Khan's ear, while a Chinese engineer explained the mechanics of a new siege engine. It was a space that was both deeply Mongolian in its traditions and remarkably cosmopolitan in its outlook. To understand this intimate world is to understand the secret of Genghis Khan's success. He was not just a brilliant general. He was a master of human relationships. He knew how to judge character, how to inspire loyalty, how to use the talents of others, and how to balance the complex, often competing interests of the powerful people who surrounded him. The Mongol Empire was conquered on horseback on the vast open plains of Eurasia, but it was governed from within the warm, smoky, and surprisingly complex circle of a single felt tent. Let us now turn our attention from the people who made up the Mongol world to the system that held it all together. The empire forged by Genghis Khan was, by any measure, a geographical absurdity. At its height, it stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe, from the frozen forests of Siberia to the warm plains of India. It was a vast, sprawling collection of diverse peoples, cultures, and landscapes. To rule such an empire presented a logistical challenge of unprecedented scale. The greatest of these challenges was communication. How could a Khan in his capital at Karakoram, deep in the Mongolian heartland, send a command to his general in Persia, 1,000 miles away? How could he receive intelligence about a rebellion in a distant province before it was too late? The answer was a system of such breathtaking speed and efficiency that it became the true nervous system of the Mongol Empire. It was called the Yam. The Yam was, in essence, the world's first great postal and express relay system. It was not a Mongol invention in its entirety. Earlier, Chinese dynasties and the Persian Empire had used similar systems on a smaller scale. But under Genghis Khan and his successors, particularly his son Ögedei, the Yam was expanded and perfected into a continental network of astonishing effectiveness. It was the logistical backbone of the empire, a web of arteries that pumped information, goods, and people across the vast body of Asia with a speed that would not be surpassed until the invention of the telegraph, 600 years later. Imagine the system. All across the empire, at regular intervals, the Mongols established a series of relay stations. These stations were strategically placed along the main routes of the empire, roughly 20 to 30 miles apart, the distance a horse could be ridden at a hard gallop before tiring. Each station was a small, self-sufficient outpost, staffed by a handful of men and stocked with a herd of fresh, well-rested horses, as well as provisions of food and water for the riders. There were thousands of these stations, a chain of logistical pearls stretching across the immense and often inhospitable landscapes of the empire. Now imagine yourself as a messenger, a rider for the Khan. You are carrying a vital dispatch, perhaps an order for a general to change his line of march, or a report on the tax revenues from a newly conquered province. The dispatch is sealed and tucked safely inside your tunic. You are given a special tablet of authority, a paisa, a small plaque of gold, silver, or wood, inscribed with the Khan's seal. This tablet is your passport, your credit card, and your warrant. It gives you the absolute right to demand a fresh horse, food, and lodging from any Yam station, and to command the assistance of any local official or commoner you encounter. To interfere with a Yam messenger, to delay him in any way, was a crime punishable by death. The message must get through. Your journey is a relentless, punishing ordeal. You ride at a full gallop, pushing your horse to its absolute limit. You do not stop for weather. You ride through scorching deserts, through freezing blizzards, over treacherous mountain passes. You are a human arrow, shot from the bow of the Khan, and you must fly true to your target. As your horse begins to tire, you see the small, welcome sight of the next Yam station on the horizon. You do not slow down. You sound a horn to announce your approach. The station keepers, hearing your call, are already preparing a fresh horse. You gallop into the station, and in a single fluid motion, you leap from the back of your exhausted mount and onto the back of the fresh one, which is already saddled and waiting. You are given a quick drink of arag or a handful of dried meat, and then you are off again, a cloud of dust on the horizon, leaving your tired horse to be cared for and rested, ready for the next rider. You do not sleep in a bed. You sleep in the saddle. You do not stop for meals. You eat on the move. The system was designed for maximum speed, and it was brutally effective. It was said that a yam messenger could cover over 200 miles in a single 24-hour period. A message from the far eastern reaches of the empire could reach the Khan's court in a matter of weeks, a journey that would have taken a normal merchant caravan many months. The effect of this was revolutionary. It made the vast empire governable. The Khan could issue commands, receive intelligence, and move officials with a speed that left his enemies, both internal and external, bewildered. It was as if the empire had a centralized nervous system, allowing it to react to threats and opportunities with a speed that was almost biological. The yam was not just for official government and military messages. It was also used for the transport of high-value goods and important individuals. Foreign envoys, like the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, who served Kublai Khan for many years, were given a paisa and were able to travel across the empire with a speed and safety that was astonishing. Polo described the yam system in his writings with a sense of awe, noting the well-appointed lodging houses at each station and the incredible number of horses, over 300,000 in total, that were dedicated to keeping the system running. The maintenance of this vast network was a huge logistical and financial burden on the empire, and it was paid for by the local populations. Each region was responsible for providing the horses, the food, and the manpower for the yam stations within its territory. It was a form of tax, a duty that was often resented by the conquered peoples, but it was enforced with the usual Mongol ruthlessness. The yam was a vital organ of the state, and its needs took precedence over all else. The system also had a profound, if unintended, cultural effect. By creating a safe and efficient network of transportation and communication across Asia, the yam facilitated an unprecedented level of interaction between different cultures. The period of Mongol rule, often known as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace, was a time of relative stability across the vast Eurasian landmass, and the yam was the infrastructure that made this peace commercially and culturally vibrant. Merchants could now travel the Silk Road with a degree of safety they had never known before. They could carry their goods, silk from China, spices from India, furs from Siberia, across the continent, using the yam stations as secure resting points. This led to a great flourishing of trade between East and West. But it was not just goods that traveled along these routes. It was ideas. Missionaries, Nestorian Christians, Buddhist monks, Franciscan friars from Europe used the yam to travel to the Mongol court and beyond, spreading their faiths. Technologies like gunpowder, the compass, and printing, which had been developed in China, made their way westward along these routes, eventually reaching Europe, where they would help to spark the Renaissance. The yam was not just a postal service, it was a conduit for the transmission of culture, science, and technology on a global scale. But this great network of connection also had a dark side. It could move ideas and goods with incredible speed, but it could also move other, more deadly things. In the mid-14th century, the yam system, with its constant flow of people and goods across the continent, became the primary vector for the spread of the bubonic plague, the Black Death. The plague, which originated in Central Asia, traveled with the caravans and the messengers along the yam routes, reaching the Crimea, and from there, it was carried by Genoese trading ships to Europe, where it would wipe out a third of the population. The very system that had been the source of the empire's strength, its interconnectedness, also proved to be its greatest vulnerability. The yam was a circulatory system, but a circulatory system can carry disease as easily as it can carry lifeblood. To be a rider on the yam was to be a living part of this great system. It was a life of immense hardship and of great importance. You were the sinew that held the empire together. You were an anonymous figure, a fleeting presence, a blur on the horizon. But the message you carried could change the course of a war, could seal the fate of a city, could carry the words of a Khan across a continent. You were the ghost in the machine, the human component in a system of such scale and efficiency that it seems, even today, almost miraculous. To contemplate the yam is to understand the true nature of the Mongol genius. It was not just a genius for conquest, it was a genius for organization, for logistics, for seeing the world not as a collection of obstacles, but as a space to be connected and controlled. The image of the lone Mongol warrior on his horse is a powerful one, but it is incomplete. The true image of the Mongol Empire is the image of 1,000 of these riders, stretched out across a continent, each a single, vital link in a great, unbroken chain. A relay of information and power that redrew the map of the world and connected its disparate peoples in ways they had never been connected before. It was a system built for a world in constant motion, a perfect reflection of the nomadic spirit that gave it birth. Let us now dismount from our tireless horse and end our long journey at the very heart of the Mongol Empire. But this heart was not a place of ancient stone and marble, like Rome or Constantinople. For a time, the capital of the largest land empire in history was a city that was, in many ways, an expression of the nomadic soul of its creators. It was a city of yurts and artisans, of foreign envoys and shamanistic rituals, a place of profound contrasts, built on an open, windswept plain in the middle of nowhere. This was the city of Karakorum. Before the rise of Genghis Khan, the Mongols had no cities. They were a people of the steppe, and their world was a mobile one. The very idea of a fixed, permanent settlement was alien to their way of life. But as the empire expanded, as it conquered vast, settled civilizations with their own ancient urban traditions, the need for a capital, a central administrative and commercial hub, became apparent. Genghis Khan himself is said to have designated the location, in the Orkhon Valley of central Mongolia, a place that was strategically located and had been a center of power for previous steppe empires. But it was his son and successor, Ögedei Khan, who truly built the city in the 1230s, transforming it from a simple encampment into a functioning, if unconventional, imperial capital. Imagine yourself arriving at Karakorum in the mid-13th century during the reign of Mongol Khan, a grandson of Genghis. Your journey has taken you for weeks across the endless, featureless sea of grass. And then, on the horizon you see it. The first thing you would notice is not a skyline of towering buildings, but a wall. Karakorum was surrounded by a great earthen wall, several miles in circumference, with 4 gates, each facing a cardinal direction. This wall was a symbol of permanence, a statement that the Mongols were no longer just a transient horde, but the masters of a lasting empire. As you pass through one of the gates, you do not enter a crowded, chaotic cityscape of narrow, winding streets. Instead, you find a city of wide, open spaces, a city that still feels like a well-organized camp. The majority of the population, including the Khan and his court for much of the year, still lived in their traditional gurs, which were arranged in neat rows. The city was a sea of these round, felt tents, their smoke rising into the clear, cold air. But interspersed among the yurts were more permanent structures, a testament to the new, cosmopolitan nature of the empire. Ögedei had commanded that artisans and craftsmen from all the conquered lands be brought to his capital to beautify it and to provide for the needs of the court. Near the eastern gate was the quarter of the Chinese craftsmen, who built beautiful wooden houses in their traditional style and produced exquisite silk textiles, ceramics, and works of art. Near the western gate was the quarter of the Muslim merchants and artisans, who were master metalworkers, jewelers, and weavers of fine carpets. The city was a mosaic of cultures, a place where a Chinese painter could be working just a few blocks from a Persian astronomer. At the very center of the city stood the most impressive permanent structure, the great palace of the Khan, the Tumen Amgalan Ord, or Palace of Myriad Peace. But this was not a palace in the European or Chinese sense, a single, massive stone building. It was a vast walled compound, and within it, the primary residence of the Khan was still a huge, opulent ger, placed upon a large raised platform. The permanent building within the palace was more of a grand administrative hall, a place for holding great feasts and audiences. A European friar, William of Rubruck, who visited Karakorum during this period, left a detailed and astonished account of this hall. He described its great nave, like that of a church, and the throne of the Khan at the far end. But the most famous and wondrous feature of the palace was a great silver tree, a masterpiece of engineering created by a captured Parisian goldsmith named Guillaume Boucher. This tree stood in the courtyard, and at its base were 4 silver lions. The tree itself had pipes running up its trunk and branches, and when the Khan wished to entertain his guests, 4 different kinds of drinks, grape wine, fermented mare's milk, rice wine, and honey mead, would flow from the mouths of the 4 lions and from pipes hidden among the branches, all into a great silver basin at the top, from which the Khan's cupbearer would draw the drinks. At the very top of the tree, an angel blew a trumpet, its sound a signal for the servants to pour. This fantastical mechanical marvel was a symbol of the Khan's power, a demonstration that he could command the finest craftsmen in the world to create wonders for his pleasure and to awe the foreign envoys who came to his court. The city of Karakorum was a place of remarkable religious tolerance. This was not born of a philosophical commitment to pluralism, but of a pragmatic indifference. As long as a religion did not challenge the authority of the Khan, it was allowed to exist. William of Rubruck described a city where he found 12 pagan temples of different nations, 2 mosques, and an Nestorian Christian church, all existing in relatively close proximity and harmony. He even witnessed a great debate, organized by Munka Khan, between representatives of the different faiths, Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists, each invited to make the case for their own beliefs. The Khan listened to them all with a detached anthropological curiosity, before declaring that just as God gave the hand different fingers, so he gave mankind different ways of worship. For him, all religions were ultimately just different paths to the same divine power, a power that had so clearly chosen to favor the Mongols. The commercial life of the city was vibrant. It was a major hub on the Silk Road, a place where caravans from east and west met to trade their goods. The markets of Karakorum were filled with a dizzying array of products. Fine silks and porcelains from China, spices and jewels from India, furs from Siberia, and textiles and metalwork from Persia and the Middle East. The city used a paper currency, an innovation adopted from the Chinese, which facilitated this large-scale trade. The Mongol elite, who had grown fabulously wealthy from the plunder of their conquests, were voracious consumers of these luxury goods. But for all its cosmopolitanism and commercial energy, Karakorum never lost its essential character as a steppe city. The rhythms of life were still governed by the nomadic calendar. The great herds of horses that were the foundation of Mongol power were kept on the vast grasslands outside the city walls. The diet of the people was still based on meat and dairy, and the Khan and his court did not reside in the city year-round. For much of the year, they would leave the city and move with their herds to their summer and winter pastures, their great mobile city of yurts recreating the traditional nomadic cycle. The permanent city of Karakorum was, in many ways, just a winter camp, an administrative headquarters, a place to store their vast accumulated wealth. But it was not yet a true, sedentary home. The city's existence was also a constant struggle against a harsh environment. Located in the heart of the steppe, the climate was one of extremes. The winters were brutally cold, with temperatures dropping far below zero, and the winds were relentless. The summers could be hot and dry. Agriculture was difficult in this environment, and the city was almost entirely dependent on grain being brought in, at great expense, from the more fertile agricultural lands of northern China. This logistical challenge was a constant source of concern for the Mongol rulers. They were the masters of a world-spanning pastoral empire, but they were dependent on the farmers they had conquered for their daily bread. The glory of Karakorum was to be remarkably short-lived. The city served as the capital of the Mongol Empire for only about 30 years. In 1260, the empire fractured into a series of civil wars between the grandsons of Genghis Khan. Kublai Khan, who would eventually emerge victorious and establish the Yuan dynasty in China, moved the capital to a new city he built, Khanbalik, which would later become modern-day Beijing. He recognized that to rule China, he had to be in China. The political center of gravity of the empire shifted away from the Mongolian heartland. With the court gone, Karakorum began a slow, irreversible decline. It was sacked and rebuilt several times during the internal wars of the Mongols and the later conflicts with the Chinese Ming dynasty, but it never regained its former glory. The great silver tree, the cosmopolitan workshops, the bustling markets, all faded away. The city slowly dissolved back into the steppe from which it had so briefly and brilliantly emerged. The permanent buildings crumbled, their stones and timbers likely scavenged for other purposes. The earthen walls eroded, becoming gentle, grass-covered mounds. Today, the site of Karakorum is a quiet, windswept place. The modern town of Karakorum lies nearby, and the beautiful 16th century monastery of Erdene-Zu, which was built from the ruins of the old city, stands as a silent witness to its past glory. But of the great imperial capital of Ögedei and Munka, very little remains visible to the naked eye. There are scattered archaeological remains, the stone tortoise that once marked the site of an official stele, the foundations of the great palace hall. But to walk there is to walk through a city of ghosts, a city that has been almost completely reclaimed by the vast, empty landscape. The story of Karakorum is a quiet but powerful meditation on the nature of the Mongol Empire itself. It was a brilliant, unprecedented, and yet ultimately transient creation. It was a city that tried to bridge two worlds, the nomadic world of the steppe and the sedentary world of the great civilizations. For a brief moment, it succeeded, creating a unique, vibrant, and cosmopolitan center of power. But the deep, nomadic instincts of its creators and the centrifugal forces of an empire that had simply grown too large pulled it apart. Karakoram was a dream of a permanent heart for a mobile empire, a dream that flickered brightly for a few decades and then was extinguished, its memory swallowed by the endless, patient, and unchanging sea of grass. Let us now conclude our journey where we began, not with the individual soldier, but within the inner circle of the great Khan himself. For it is in this intimate, domestic space that the seeds of both the empire's spectacular success and its eventual fragmentation were sown. We have seen the Khan's court as a center of governance and cosmopolitan exchange. But it was also a family, a household defined by complex relationships, fierce loyalties, and even fiercer rivalries. To understand the latter years of Genghis Khan and the reigns of his immediate successors is to understand the powerful and often competing influences of the people who shared his yurt, his wives, his mother, and most consequentially, his sons. The structure of the Mongol imperial family was a source of immense strength. The bonds of kinship were the bedrock of the state. The empire was not seen as an abstract political entity, but as the collective property, the ulus of the Golden Family, the descendants of Genghis Khan. His sons and grandsons were not just generals, they were princes, each granted their own vast appanage, their own portion of the conquered territories to rule. This system allowed for a decentralized administration that was well suited to the immense scale of the empire. We have already spoken of the immense influence of the Khan's mother, Holon, and his chief wife, Berta. Their authority was not just emotional, it was structural. The senior women of the imperial family controlled vast personal wealth, their own households, orders, and their own herds. They were patrons, political players, and the guardians of tradition. After Genghis Khan's death, it was the empresses, the khatuns, who often held the empire together during the difficult transition periods between one Khan and the next. The widow of a great Khan would often rule as regent until a new Kurultai could be assembled to elect a successor. Women like Toragene Khatun, the widow of Ogadei, and Sorkoktani Beki, the widow of Genghis's youngest son Tolui, were among the most powerful and politically astute rulers of their time. Women who shaped the destiny of the empire through their intelligence and their ambition for their own sons. Sorkoktani, in particular, is a figure of immense historical importance. She was a Nestorian Christian princess of the Keret tribe who was married to Tolui. After her husband's death, she inherited control of his vast and wealthy appanage in northern China. She proved to be a brilliant administrator, promoting agriculture, patronizing scholars, and governing with a wisdom that earned her the respect of her Chinese subjects. But her greatest achievement was the political education of her four sons, Mungke, Kublai, Hulagu, and Arik Boka. She raised them to be rulers, instilling in them a sense of discipline, a respect for learning, and a powerful ambition. All four of her sons would go on to become Khans, with Mungke and Kublai ruling as great Khans of the entire empire, Hulagu founding the Ilkhanate in Persia, and Arik Boka contending for the throne. The fact that this one woman was the mother of four of the most powerful men in the 13th century world is a testament to her extraordinary influence and the significant, if often indirect, power that women could wield in the Mongol world. But while the bonds of family were a source of strength, they were also the empire's greatest weakness. The question of succession, of who would inherit the ultimate authority of the great Khan, was a source of constant, simmering tension. This tension was rooted in a deep and painful uncertainty at the very heart of Genghis Khan's own family. The question of the legitimacy of his firstborn son, Yochi. You will recall that early in their marriage, Berta was kidnapped by the Merkit tribe and was held captive for many months. Shortly after she was rescued, she gave birth to Yochi. While Genghis Khan always publicly accepted Yochi as his own, a shadow of doubt always remained. The name Yochi itself means guest in Mongolian, a name that could be interpreted as a quiet acknowledgement of this uncertainty. This ambiguity was a source of private pain for the family, and a source of public political ammunition for Jochi's rivals, particularly his hot-tempered younger brother, Chagatai. Chagatai, a stern legalist and a fierce guardian of Mongol tradition, openly questioned Jochi's parentage. In one famous and dramatic scene described in the Secret History, during a council meeting to discuss the succession, Chagatai publicly declared that he would never accept the rule of a bastard of a merchant. The insult led to a violent confrontation between the brothers, and Genghis Khan himself had to intervene to restore order. This deep, bitter rivalry between the two eldest sons cast a long shadow over the future of the empire. Genghis Khan, recognizing the danger this disunity posed, ultimately decided to bypass both Jochi and Chagatai. He chose his third son, Ögedei, as his designated successor. Ögedei was a very different man from his brothers. He was affable, generous, and a famously heavy drinker, but he also possessed a natural charisma and a gift for consensus building that made him an ideal choice to hold the fractious family together. Jochi, who was a capable military commander and ruler of the westernmost part of the empire, died shortly before his father, his death shrouded in some mystery, preventing a direct succession crisis. But the underlying tensions remained. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, a Kurultai was held, and as per his wishes, Ögedei was formally elected as the second Great Khan. His reign was a period of consolidation and further expansion. It was he who built the capital at Karakorum, he who formalized the Yam system, and he who launched the great Mongol invasion of Europe, a campaign that swept through Russia, Poland, and Hungary, and brought the Mongol armies to the gates of Vienna. But Ögedei's own weakness was his love of drink, and his reign was cut short by his early death in 1241, a death that was likely hastened by his alcoholism. His death plunged the empire into a prolonged period of instability. His widow, Töregene, ruled as regent for 5 years, a period of intense political maneuvering and corruption, as she worked tirelessly to ensure the election of her own son, Guyuk, as the next great Khan. She succeeded, but Guyuk's reign was short and marked by a growing and dangerous rivalry with his cousin, Batu, the Khan of the Western Territories, the man who would found the Golden Horde. The empire was teetering on the brink of a full-scale civil war between the houses of Ögedei and Jochi. The unity of the empire was saved, for a time, by the brilliant political maneuvering of the woman we have already met, Sorkoktani Beki. She formed a powerful alliance with Batu, and at a Kurultai held in 1251, she managed to have her own son, Monker, elected as the Great Khan. This was a major shift in power, moving the supreme leadership of the empire from the line of Ögedei to the line of Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tolui. Monker was a capable and disciplined ruler, in many ways the last of the great Khans to command the genuine allegiance of the entire empire. But the underlying fractures were too deep. The Mongol tradition of succession was not based on primogeniture, the automatic inheritance by the eldest son. The Khan was, in theory, elected by a council of the princes. This system, while seemingly democratic, was a recipe for chronic instability. Every time a Khan died, the empire was plunged into a political crisis, as the different branches of the family vied for power. The princes, ruling their own vast territories, had become, in effect, semi-independent kings. They had their own armies, their own ambitions, and their own visions for the future of the empire. The final irreparable split came after Monker's death in 1259. A civil war broke out between his two younger brothers, Kublai and Arik Burka, both of whom had themselves proclaimed as the Great Khan. Kublai, who was based in China, eventually won the war, but the cost was the unity of the empire. The other Khans of the Western Territories never fully accepted his rule. The great unified empire of Genghis Khan was no more. It had fractured into 4 successor states: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. These states would continue to be powerful forces in their own right for centuries to come, but the dream of a single, universal Mongol empire was over. It had been shattered by the very thing that had created it: the powerful, ambitious, and ultimately rivalrous family of the Great Khan himself. To sit inside the imagined yurt of Genghis Khan, then, is to sit at the very heart of this great historical paradox. It was a space of incredible unity, a place where a single man's will and vision brought a scattered people together and launched them on the path to world conquest. But it was also a space of human emotion, of family dynamics, of love, jealousy, and ambition. The bonds forged in that small circular room were strong enough to conquer the world. But the rivalries born in that same small space were powerful enough to tear that world apart. The story of the Mongol elite is a profound and timeless human drama, a quiet, intimate story of a single family whose personal relationships and internal struggles would shape the destiny of millions and redraw the map of the world. Conclusion. And so, our journey across the vast and windswept world of the Mongol Empire comes to a quiet end. We have ridden with the young warrior, feeling the relentless exhaustion and the brutal discipline that forged the most feared army of its age. We have walked with the outcast boy, Temujin, through his desperate struggle for survival, and witnessed his transformation into the universal ruler, Genghis Khan. We have stood in the silence of the Khenti Mountains, contemplating the enduring mystery of his hidden tomb, a final, masterful act of secrecy. We have marveled at the speed and efficiency of the Great Yam Relay, the nervous system that held a continent together. We have walked the wide open streets of the fleeting capital, Karakoram, a city of yurts and wonders. And we have sat within the intimate circle of the Khan's own yurt, the domestic and political heart of the empire, where the bonds of family both built a world and ultimately broke it apart. What we are left with is a story of profound and unsettling contrasts. It is a story of a people who were, at once, creators and destroyers, unifiers and conquerors. It is the story of an empire that fostered unprecedented trade, communication, and cultural exchange across a vast continent, a peace enforced by the threat of almost unimaginable violence. It is the story of a leader who was both a brilliant, visionary state builder and a ruthless, calculating warlord, responsible for the deaths of millions. As you settle now more deeply into the comfort and stillness of your own space, perhaps you can reflect on the nature of this legacy. The Mongol Empire, for all its ferocity, was a transient thing, a great, brilliant flash in the long expanse of human history. But its impact was permanent. It shattered old worlds and created the conditions for new ones to emerge. It connected East and West in ways that had never been imagined, setting in motion a chain of events that would shape the world we live in today. The vast empty silence of the steppe that we began with is not truly empty. It is filled with the echoes of thundering hooves, with the whispers of forgotten languages, with the ghosts of a people who, for a brief, astonishing moment, held the entire world in their grasp. Let those echoes now fade. Let the wind die down. There are no more armies on the march, no more messages to be carried across a continent. There is only the quiet of this moment, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, and the deep, peaceful rest that awaits you. Allow yourself to drift now, to let go of this vast and distant world, and to find your own quiet peace.